You used my name for what? The call came just after lunch while my son was napping and I was sorting through coupons on the kitchen table trying to stretch our grocery budget for the week. The voice on the line was polite, clipped, and utterly indifferent. "Miss Rachel Kim," he said, "this is just a courtesy reminder. Your payment for the second installment on the home equity loan is 30 days past due. If we don't hear from you by Friday, we'll begin foreclosure proceedings." I laughed. Actually laughed because I thought it was a mistake. I didn't have a home equity loan. I didn't owe anyone a dime on this house. It was mine, paid in full, bought with years of discipline, skipped vacations, sleepless nights after Elijah was born. Every inch of this home had come from me, so I asked him to repeat it, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. But he repeated it like he was reading a weather forecast. Bold, precise, already moving on. I hung up, checked the mailbox, dug through old papers. Nothing. Not a single letter, no notice, no warning. Just that voice, still ringing in my head. Foreclosure proceedings. My hands were trembling. I called the bank, spoke to 3 different departments. They confirmed the paperwork, signed, notarized, processed. The loan existed. The house had been used as collateral. And the borrower? Rachel Kim. Same name, same birth date, same social security number, except I never signed anything. That's when I knew something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. And deep in my chest, beneath the panic, a colder realization began to settle. This wasn't a stranger's doing. Someone close to me had stolen more than money. They had stolen my safety. I wrote my name. And when I found out who it was, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I made a single call. And everything changed after that. That night, I barely slept. I kept walking from room to room, touching walls as if they might disappear beneath my fingertips. This house had been my sanctuary for 8 years. The beige hallway where Elijah took his first steps. The creaky stair that always warned me when someone was sneaking in late. The kitchen where I'd stood barefoot at midnight, eating cereal after long shifts at the firm. Every inch of it had been earned. No gifts, no co-signers, no shortcuts. Just me, a calculator, and a will harder than the granite countertops I'd saved 2 years to install. I sat at the dining table with a printout from the bank in front of me. 2 signatures. One was mine, the real one, copied from old mortgage documents. The other was identical. Too identical. That's what scared me most. Whoever did this knew me. Not just my name, not just my birthday, but my pen strokes, my legal habits, my silence. I called my ex-husband first. We'd been divorced for 4 years, amicably. He was out of the picture financially, and I knew instinctively it wasn't him. Still, I had to ask. His shock was genuine. He even offered to help me talk to a lawyer. I thanked him, then called my older sister. She was cautious, concerned, said all the right things. But there was something in her voice, a beat too long before each sentence, a phrase I'd heard before. Family wouldn't do that to you. Except they would. Because they already had. You don't question your family until you have to. Until the evidence is printed in front of you and the numbers don't lie. I started pulling records. Credit reports, county filings. I skipped work that week, told HR it was a personal emergency. I spent every morning with Elijah and every afternoon combing through paper trails, piecing together a puzzle someone had tried to burn. And then I found it. A notary log, scanned online. The witness listed? Grace Min, my sister-in-law. Right. Of all people. The one who cried at my baby shower and said I was the sister she never had. The one I helped move 3 times in 4 years. The one who called me when her mom was in the hospital and I left work early to sit with her in the waiting room until 2 a.m.? I stared at the notary log, not wanting to believe what I already knew. Her name was there, signed beside mine, like she had the right. The timestamp matched the loan application date exactly. That meant she was the one who witnessed the fake signature. Not just complicit. She enabled it. I pulled up her address, heart hammering so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to stay upright. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the slow, cold crystallization of betrayal. I didn't text, I didn't call, I drove. The air outside felt heavier as I pulled into her neighborhood, a row of matching townhomes, all painted optimism and HOA-approved shrubs. Grace opened the door like she'd been expecting me, wearing one of those flowy cardigans she always thought made her look like a life coach. Her smile faltered the moment she saw my face. "Rachel," she said, trying too quickly to sound casual, "I was just about to call you." I didn't step inside. Energy, I didn't raise my voice. I held up the paper, pointed to her name. "Explain this." She didn't deny it. "Not at first." She blinked, swallowed, looked over her shoulder like she might call for backup. Then she said, "Look, it wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was just a temporary bridge loan. Jason's promotion got delayed and we were underwater with the remodeling. Jason, my brother, my only sibling, the one I covered rent for in college when his scholarship didn't stretch far enough, the one I defended when Dad said he'd never grow up, the one I gave my backup key to just in case, because I believed in family more than fences." Grace kept talking, words tumbling over each other like excuses trying to outpace consequence. "He said he'd tell you eventually, but when the house went through and the payments started coming due, we didn't think you'd notice. You weren't even using the equity." "You stole my name," I interrupted. My voice didn't shake. It landed like stone. She flinched. Not because I was wrong, but because I was right and calm. And that scared her more than shouting ever could. "I trusted you," I said, quieter now but sharper. "You took my trust and turned it into collateral." Grace tried to soften her tone. "We were desperate. Jason thought you'd understand. You're always the one who keeps things together." That's when I understood something I hadn't let myself admit for years. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a safety net. A backup plan. The one who always said yes. Because I didn't yell. Because I didn't make drama. Because I let loyalty override self-respect. Not anymore. I walked away from her porch without waiting for more lies. That night I filed a report with the fraud division. The officer listened carefully, asked for documents, copies, names. I had them all. I'd done the work, and when he looked at the notary stamp and whistled low through his teeth, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not revenge. Something cleaner. Resolve. The bank paused proceedings pending investigation. I filed a civil claim. My lawyer said the signature was enough to trigger charges. Grace and Jason would be served within the week. I sat in Elijah's room that night, watching him sleep, the soft rise and fall of his chest like proof that quiet things could still be safe. I thought of everything I'd built, everything they tried to take, and I made myself a promise. Out loud. Even if only the walls heard. No one uses my name without earning it, not again. The summons went out on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, Jason had left me 4 missed calls and 2 voicemails that started calm and ended desperate. He didn't say he was sorry. He said things like, "Can't we talk about this?" And, "Do you really want to drag our family through court?" As if I was the one who'd dragged anything. Grace didn't call. She sent an email. Bold, legal sounding, like the damage had already been handed off to someone in a suit. I didn't reply. My attorney, a woman named Ava with sharp eyes and a sharper memory, walked me through the case step by step. "They counted on you never pushing back," she said. "People like this, They don't expect the quiet ones to bite. I didn't smile. I didn't have it in me. But I nodded. She was right. They'd spent years mistaking my grace for weakness. We gathered documents, loan papers, signature samples, email threads. Ava requested a handwriting expert. The expert confirmed what I already knew. The signature wasn't just forged, it had been practiced, deliberate. Someone took time to get it right. Someone thought it through. That part hurt the most. Not the theft. Not the betrayal. But the premeditation. They'd made a plan. And I was the blueprint. The pretrial hearing was set for the end of March. It felt surreal, sitting across the room from my brother and his wife, each flanked by attorneys they probably couldn't afford, both avoiding my eyes like looking at me might trigger a memory they weren't ready to face. Jason looked older than I remembered. Tired. Bloated. Like guilt had weight and he wore it badly. Grace, on the other hand, looked composed, hands folded in her lap, chin slightly raised, as if this was just another business meeting. But the way she kept tugging at her wedding ring told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't calm. She was cornered. Ava did most of the talking. She laid out the evidence clearly, methodically. The forged signature, the notary log, the false statements on the loan application. Jason's lawyer tried to argue familial misunderstanding, but Ava shut that down so fast even the clerk raised an eyebrow. There was no misunderstanding. There was fraud. Intentional, documented, and now under oath. Afterward, in the hallway, Jason finally approached me. He looked small, shoulders hunched like a boy about to be grounded. "You really want to ruin our family over this?" he whispered. I stared at him, holding my breath for a moment before answering. "I'm not ruining anything, Jason. I'm just not letting you get away with ruining me." He didn't reply, just stood there, blinking like someone who'd finally realized the door he slammed shut might never open again. I walked past him without looking back. The old version of me, the one who would have softened, second-guessed, folded. She was gone. I didn't need revenge. I needed air. And standing in that courthouse telling the truth out loud, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The trial date was set for late May. It gave me 2 months to prepare, but really, I'd been preparing for this my whole life. I had spent years being the reliable one, the quiet achiever, the fixer who showed up when no one else could be trusted. And now, for the first time, I wasn't fixing anyone else's mess. I was cleaning the slate for myself. The weight of that shift was heavier than I expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted. But beneath the exhaustion was something sharper, something like freedom. Ava and I met twice a week to finalize everything. She walked me through witness statements, subpoenaed bank communications, even pulled in a forensic analyst to testify on the digital trail behind the forged application. It wasn't just about proving they lied. It was about showing how calculated it all had been. Every email Grace sent from a burner account, every click Jason made from our parents' Wi-Fi while pretending to help Mom with taxes. They had plotted, coordinated, and worst of all, they had assumed I wouldn't notice. The day before the trial, I took Elijah to the park and sat on a bench while he climbed the monkey bars, his laugh echoing like music over the playground. I watched him for a long time. This whole fight, this whole reclaiming of self, was for him more than anyone. He needed to grow up, knowing his mother didn't flinch when someone tried to take what was hers, that she didn't stay quiet to keep the peace if the peace was built on lies. That evening, I packed my documents into a simple brown folder, no color tabs or frills, just truth, stacked page by page, weighty and calm. I didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't imagine their faces. I just breathed, in and out, steady. I had already won the moment I decided my name was worth protecting, not with rage, but with resolve. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature but in tone, the kind of stillness that made every cough sound like a cannon. Jason and Grace sat at the defendant's table, their eyes forward, their bodies rigid. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I knew what they had done. My job now was to let the facts do the talking. Ava opened strong, laying out the timeline with surgical precision, the forged notary log, the digital footprints, the notarized signature that matched mine too perfectly to be a coincidence. The opposing counsel tried their best to muddy the waters, implying I had given verbal consent, that families often do things informally, that this was a misunderstanding, spiraled out of proportion. But under cross-examination, Grace cracked. She slipped, admitted to using an old copy of my ID from a shared folder, admitted to notarizing the form in her kitchen with Jason present, admitted they didn't think it would hurt anyone. The silence after that confession was louder than any gavel. When I took the stand, I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. I told the story plainly. The call from the bank, the signature I never wrote, the name they took without asking. I looked directly at the judge when I said, "They didn't just borrow money, they borrowed me, my name, my record, my future." The words didn't shake, they landed, and for the first time in months, I felt steady in my own skin. 2 days later, the ruling came down. The loan was declared fraudulent, the foreclosure nullified. Jason and Grace were fined and referred to criminal court for investigation. I walked out of the courthouse with the sun on my face and no one waiting at the steps. Not even to argue. I didn't need applause. I didn't need apologies. I had my name back. And this time I was the only one holding it. For weeks after the trial, I kept waiting to feel something bigger. Maybe euphoria, maybe relief. But what I felt was quieter, like the air after a thunderstorm. Things were still damp, still broken in places, but the worst had passed. I went back to work. I reorganized my finances. I changed my passwords. I updated my home security system. Victory didn't feel like trumpets or parades. It felt like walking into my kitchen and knowing every piece of furniture was exactly where I left it. Elijah never asked what happened, but he noticed I smiled more. He noticed I stopped checking the mailbox with clenched fists. One night, as I tucked him in, he whispered, "You don't look sad anymore." I kissed his forehead and held him a little longer than usual. I hadn't realized how much I'd carried in my posture, in the way I folded laundry, in the silence between dinner and bedtime. Now, that silence was softer, less about survival, more about peace. Jason didn't try to contact me again, neither did Grace. Our parents stayed mostly silent, too. I think they didn't know what to say, to me or to themselves. For years, I had been the invisible glue that held family gatherings, budgets, emergencies together. Now I was gone, not in body, but in spirit. I stopped showing up to save everyone, and without me, things began to fall apart. But I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't gloat. I let them sit with the silence I had lived in for years. I spent that spring tending my tiny backyard garden. Tomatoes, mint, a lemon tree I thought would never take root, but had started to stretch upward in spite of everything. There was something healing in watching things grow on their own terms. No expectations, no obligations, just sun, soil, and time. And in that quiet, I began to imagine something I hadn't in a long time. Not revenge, not justice, but possibility. In April, Ava invited me to a small panel on financial abuse, hosted by a local women's center. She said I didn't have to speak if I didn't want to. Just being there, she said, might help someone feel less alone. I almost said no. Public speaking was never my thing. But something inside me said, go. Not to be brave, not to be wise, just to be present. I sat in a room with 20 strangers, some nodding, some crying, some staring at the floor as stories unfolded. A woman talked about a joint account drained behind her back. Another spoke of her credit ruined by a boyfriend who disappeared after maxing her name. When it was my turn, I didn't rehearse. I just told the truth, that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies, and silence is not the same as peace. The room was quiet when I finished, not because they pitied me, but because they saw themselves in my story. Afterward, a younger woman approached me in the parking lot. Her voice shook as she said, "I thought I was overreacting, but after hearing you, I know I'm not crazy." I placed a hand on her arm gently and told her, "You're not crazy. You're just finally listening to yourself." I went home that night feeling something strange. Not pride, not closure. It was softer than that, like turning on a porch light for someone else. I didn't need recognition. I just needed to know my voice had landed somewhere, had echoed in someone else's chest long enough to loosen the knots. By May, I had begun to donate quietly to women's shelters. No big gestures, no plaques, just groceries, warm coats, prepaid phones left in unmarked bags. I didn't need anyone to know it was me. I knew what it felt like to need help and have no place to ask. And I also knew what it meant to finally ask yourself, what would it look like to live without fear? And then begin. I started taking small trips again, just me and Elijah. Weekend drives to the coast, short hikes in the redwoods, quiet mornings in towns with names we couldn't pronounce but remembered for their kindness. We stayed in modest motels, shared meals at roadside diners, and laughed at things that didn't require explanation. I didn't post photos. I didn't tell many people. These weren't vacations. They were recoveries. One afternoon in Mendocino, while Elijah chased seagulls on the beach, I stood watching the waves roll in and felt an odd kind of stillness wash over me. Not the empty kind, the settled kind. Like something inside had finally stopped bracing for a hit that wasn't coming. I realized I no longer needed to replay the trial in my head, no longer needed to imagine what I would have said if I were angrier, louder, tougher. I had been exactly who I needed to be, and that was enough. When we got home, the house felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I had. The walls no longer reminded me of what was taken. They reminded me of what I reclaimed. Every tile, every drawer, every doorknob carried my fingerprint. It was mine, not because of the deed or the court ruling, but because I had stayed. I had fought. I had chosen myself. I began writing again in quiet corners of the night. Just small pieces. Essays, letters I'd never send. Pages filled with thoughts I once thought didn't matter. But they did, because they were mine. No one edited them, no one borrowed them, no one signed them in my name. They were soft, but they were true. And the more I wrote, the more I remembered I wasn't just recovering from something, I was returning to myself. In early June, a letter arrived from the county clerk. It was official now. The fraudulent lien had been fully expunged. My record was clean. The title was secure. There would be no appeal, no challenge, no further hearing. It was done. I sat with the envelope in my hand for a long time before opening it. Not because I was afraid, but because part of me didn't need the paper to confirm what I already knew. I had won, long before this. Still, it felt good to hold it. Tangible proof of the fight no one saw coming. I framed the document and hung it, not in the living room, not in my office, but in the hallway across from the coat closet. A quiet place, a daily reminder. Not for guests, for me. A note to self. You did this. You kept standing when the ground beneath you was being sold off piece by piece. That summer, Elijah and I planted sunflowers along the fence. He picked the tallest seeds, the ones he thought looked brave. By August, they towered above us, gold-faced and unapologetic, bending but never breaking. He asked if we could plant more next year. I told him, we can plant whatever we want, and I meant it. Sometimes, I still hear whispers of the past, an old song that played during the trial, a smell that reminds me of Grace's perfume, a voicemail from Jason I never deleted. But they don't hurt anymore. They just pass through, like ghosts who no longer haunt. Just visit to see how the house turned out after they left. And me? I'm not rebuilding anymore. I'm blobbing. By fall, the rhythm of my life had changed. Mornings weren't rushed anymore. Elijah and I had pancakes on Wednesdays just because we could. I started walking before work, just 20 minutes, through the neighborhood. No earbuds, no podcasts, just the sound of gravel under my shoes and the wind threading through tree branches. That stillness used to scare me. Now, I craved it. Because in that quiet, I wasn't anyone's emergency contact, anyone's financial backup, anyone's safety net. I was just me. Present, breathing, free. At work, people noticed the change. My posture, my voice, the way I said no now without explaining. I started mentoring a new associate. Sharp mind, kind eyes, always apologizing for speaking up. I told her once, don't shrink to fit a space that wasn't built for your fullness. She smiled like it hurt and said, that's hard. I nodded, yes, but not impossible. Jason and Grace moved out of state. I heard through a cousin they were trying to start over, as if geography erases character. I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, just distance. And that, oddly, was the most freeing feeling of all. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to change. I just needed the story to no longer be about them. So I wrote a new one. Not a book, not a blog, just for me. It started with a sentence I never thought I'd write. I am no longer responsible for other people's comfort. It continued with mornings full of music, weekends that didn't revolve around obligation, and holidays spent with people who didn't ask me to prove my loyalty with silence. I hosted a dinner that Thanksgiving, just 6 of us, a few friends, Elijah and Ava. We didn't say grace. We shared small stories. One of them laughed so hard wine came out her nose. And in that ridiculous moment, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not pride, not triumph. The kind you don't defend in court or fight to reclaim. The kind you build inside yourself when everything else has fallen away. The kind that blooms after the fire, not in spite of it. The kind they can never steal again. They thought I'd fall apart quietly, that I'd accept the loss, swallow the betrayal, and bury it under politeness, like I always had. But I didn't. I spoke up. I showed up. And I stayed. I stayed when it got ugly. I stayed when they tried to shame me into silence. I stayed when the courtroom went still and every eye turned toward mine. And what I found on the other side of staying wasn't noise or applause. It was clarity. It was space. They took my name. So I made it mine again. I stole the roof over my head. So I built a foundation no one could touch. I used to think being the good one meant forgiving everything. Now, I know being good to yourself sometimes means walking away and locking the door behind you. So if you're listening, if someone you love used your kindness as currency, your silence as strategy, let me say that you are allowed to reclaim your name. You are allowed to protect your peace. And you are allowed to write the ending no one else expected, especially the one where you win by becoming free.